Bienvenidos. Welcome everyone. Give me 1 second. We're going to go live here on Instagram as well. So give me 1 second while we do that. Okay, we are in. Thank you all so much for being here today. Happy Wednesday. If you're new around here, my name is Mariana. You are watching Mexico Relocation Guide, where we teach you how to move to Mexico the right way. And one very important part of moving to Mexico the right way is finding rentals, whether that be short-term or long-term. So if you're interested in that topic, today's live stream is going to hopefully give you a lot of really good information and help you understand how the rental market works in Mexico. What are some benefits of renting versus buying? Where to find rentals, the common contract terms that you will see across different cities in Mexico, things to look out for, so like scams that you might want to avoid. And then, of course, we're also going to talk about our very special giveaway. So if you're new around here, welcome. If you are not, welcome back. Let me know in the comments where you are watching us from. And of course, this is a Q&A, so I am going to cover a couple of topics. But of course, these live streams are for you at home watching. So go ahead and start posting your questions. Make sure that it's rental related, because we're going to focus solely on housing today, finding rentals. We're not really going to go into buying properties or that whole process, because that's an entirely different process. We're going to stick to short-term rentals and long-term rentals today. So thank you all so much for being here. Go ahead and let me know in the comments where you're watching us from. And then I'll give you guys a minute here to join us. Go ahead and start posting what questions you have for today. William, thanks so much for being here. Pamela, it's been a while since I've seen you on one of our live streams. Thank you so much for being here today. Yeah, so Jimmy, thanks so much for being here tonight. I will get into, if you see me look down, it's because I'm looking at my notes, because I want to make sure that I don't miss anything that that is important to cover on this topic. And I base my notes on the frequently asked questions that we get regarding renting. So just don't mind me if I look down. It's just because I'm looking at my notes. Watching from Ohio, Tennessee, Detroit, nice, Seattle, Arizona, Texas, Indiana, Puerto Vallarta, all over the place. I love it. Birmingham, Alabama. That is so awesome. Do you guys have any specific Thanksgiving plans for those of you who are watching us from the United States? I would love to know. For those of you who are watching us from Canada, I know that your Thanksgiving has passed. But I would love to know for those of you who are watching us from, even if you're watching us from Mexico and you are American, do you have any Thanksgiving plans? Pennsylvania, New York City, Montreal. I want to go to Montreal so bad. I've heard beautiful and wonderful things about Montreal, and I really want to visit it. Mexico City, Alabama, Grand Canyon, nice. Okay. Well, I feel like we've had enough people join us at this point, so no pavo. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, William. Personally, I don't care for turkey. So, I would be fine just eating all the sides for any Thanksgiving meal. But yeah, Colorado Springs. I used to live in Colorado Springs. Very, very awesome town. All right, let's get into it. So I am going to go over the benefits of renting versus buying. So a lot of you who are thinking about moving to Mexico, you might have never lived in Mexico before. And even if you have, you might not have lived in that specific city that you're thinking of moving to. And even if you have lived in that specific city, I have a lot of customers who, like, for example, a lot of them went to language school in Cuernavaca, or they studied in Monterrey, or, their parents were maybe from Puebla and they visited a lot when they were younger, but then, they grew up in the United States, kind of like me, right? I visited Mexico a lot when I was younger. Obviously, I was born and raised in Mexico, but then at a certain point, I moved back to the United States, or my parents moved us to the US. And then, we would visit Mexico a lot. But it's very different to visit a specific city or not be back there than it is to live in it. And for that matter, even finding rentals in it, right? So, or finding housing. So the benefits I feel that a lot of people find in renting versus buying is, number one, the flexibility. It's not the same to rent a house in Mexico than it is to buy. When you buy, you're obviously contractually obligated in a much more serious way. Not that you're not when you're renting, but it is a lot harder for you to be able to sell a house or an asset in Mexico than it is to just be able to eventually leave a rental, right? Rental contracts are usually written for 6 months to a year. So you know that you can eventually be able to either leave that rental, or you are able to at least negotiate with a landlord if in case a rental isn't working out for you. And a lot of landlords might be open to that if you're willing to maybe pay, for them to keep your deposit or something like that in order for them to be able to rent it out. So flexibility by all means is the number one reason why we seriously recommend renting first before buying. It also gives you the ability to scope out different areas across Mexico. And I'm going to get into short-term rentals and long-term rentals, because if you are scoping out different areas of Mexico, I know customers and people at home who are maybe watching us from Mexico who are scouting different cities and they're really looking for their ideal place. We've also had customers who lived at the beach for maybe 1 or 2 years, and then they decided that the Central Highlands was more their beat and more their weather and more their environment. They felt more at home there. Or maybe they wanted to live in a bigger city, or maybe they wanted to live in a smaller city. So just giving yourself that flexibility to be able to move around and be able to not be locked into a place like you would if you were buying property. Number two, a lot of rentals in Mexico come furnished. So it's not unusual to find rentals that come. Now, obviously, there's variances in the level of furnishings that you will find. Some houses come fully furnished, and I mean, they include dishes, silverware, towels, linens, curtains, beds, obviously, a fridge, a microwave, everything that you would think that you would need to live comfortably in a home to just be able to walk in and it be turnkey ready. And then some places say they're furnished, but it's really just a bed, maybe a dining room table, maybe some chairs, maybe a shower curtain, maybe not. So it is really important for you to know that just because it says furnished doesn't mean it comes fully furnished. However, if it says furnished, it will at least have a bed for you to sleep on, so that then you can, buy other things as you see fit, right? Like if you find the need to have, obviously plates, obviously utensils, obviously, maybe towels and things like that. Those are things you can start acquiring little by little, or maybe a lot of people bring them from back home. It just depends on your independent situation. But yeah, I mean, the flexibility to be able to scout different parts of Mexico, to be able to, maybe you think that you're a beach person, but you've never been to the Central Highlands of Mexico, which I highly recommend everyone at least check out once and not discount it. Or maybe you've never been to some of the beach resorts in Mexico and you've only ever been to Mexico City or one of the major cities in the Highlands. And it's also worth it to go and check out some of the beach resorts, because some of these places are, they're very, very foreigner focused, right? There's so much tourism that a lot of people speak English. The hotel staff speaks English, and a lot of people work at hotels and in the hospitality sector. So a lot of people at least will speak, even if it's not fluent English, you can at least understand each other. So it is usually a little bit easier to integrate into these resort towns that get a lot of foreigners visit them, whereas maybe somewhere in the Central Highlands where, there's not a lot of foreigners, especially if you're going to a town like Tasco, or maybe you're going to, Atlisco, or some other town where maybe English or Spanish is not as, English is not as prevalent, maybe Valle de Bravo, or maybe Tepoztlán, right? So some of these, or Cuernavaca, some of these cities that are beautiful, have really nice weather, they're surrounded by mountains, they have a charm, a colonial charm that you won't really find in a lot of beach towns, except for maybe Puerto Vallarta. But yeah, so it just gives you the flexibility to be able to explore Mexico outside of the areas that you already know of. And then the other benefit is, like I mentioned, that a lot of rentals come furnished. So, but it is important for you to know exactly what that means and not to assume anything at all, and to make sure that you get a list of what exactly is going to stay at the house. Which brings me to another point, and renting versus buying, why it might actually be more in your favor. And some people, by the way, it's totally okay for you to rent forever. We have tons of customers who never buy properties. They will just perpetually be renters. And sometimes it's more affordable for them. You don't have to really worry about the ongoing maintenance of owning a home, right? The landlord is supposed to take care of those things. Of course, landlords also vary. So, take that with a grain of salt, that it's not like every landlord is going to be impeccable. But yeah, it might actually be more affordable for you to rent a place long-term than for you to buy a place. Just depends on the place that you're looking into buying or the place that you're looking into renting. Some rentals might actually be like, you might be able to find rentals closer to the neighborhoods that you want to live in, whereas like there might not be a lot of houses for sale in the neighborhood that you want to live in that fit in your budget. So, some people just will rent forever, and that's totally fine. If after a year or two they decide that, hey, you know what, Puerto Vallarta is not for me and I want to go check out Guadalajara, maybe that's what they do, right? And then maybe 2 years after that, they say, hey, you know what, I'm good with Guadalajara. I want to go check out Querétaro. And hey, you can easily just move from one place to the other if you're a renter. Whereas if you're selling a property, it usually takes longer, especially if the property that you're selling is at a higher price point. So those are all little things that we say are some of the biggest benefits of renting versus buying. There's also less risk, right? Like if you're renting, it's always easier to get out of a lease or to be able to eventually move out than if you are buying a property. If you are going to be renting, we also think it's important that you be at least acquainted with the neighborhood that you're going to be renting in, especially if you're going to sign a lease for 6 months to a year, or contract for 6 months to a year. If you're just doing a short-term rental like on Airbnb and you're just doing a month to month or a week to week, then obviously you don't really have a lot of risk. Whereas if you are renting 6 months to a year and you end up really disliking your neighbors, or you have a neighbor that has a lot of noise, really loud barking dogs, whatever the reason might be that you aren't loving the neighborhood that you're in, it just depends on whether you're doing short-term or long-term. But yeah, there's less risk if you're renting versus buying. I'm not trying to dissuade anybody from buying a property. Quite the opposite. I think that purchasing properties in Mexico can be very, very, very good for you. For starters, property taxes are very low compared to Canada and the United States. Those are going to be the two examples I give the most because, we are neighbors to the north. But I mean, it just depends on everybody's particular situation. And I will say that we recommend renting for at least 6 months to a year in any city of Mexico that you're planning on living in before actually purchasing a property. This will give you a chance to not only get acquainted with the city, know which neighborhoods you really like, decide if that's the city that you actually want to buy property in, and all those things, right? Like it'll give you time to actually reflect and be honest with yourself and see, like, do I want to set some roots down here? Are there houses in my budget? All those things. So just don't get pressured into buying something right away just because it's a good deal, or because, it's like a pre-sale that they're trying to give you like a significantly lower cost than if you bought 2 years after the development was completed. It's really up to you, but I would say that it's a really good idea for you to rent for at least 6 months to a year before deciding on buying anything. You also don't know if Mexico is the right country for you. Now, especially right now, there's probably going to be a huge influx of people who are thinking of moving outside the United States, or maybe other parts of the world where, they feel like there's political turmoil or other turmoil of whatever reason. Maybe the cost of living, or maybe healthcare, or there's so many reasons people move to Mexico or other countries. But, visiting and reading about Mexico and watching videos like ours even is very different than actually uprooting your life and spending time here and being here long term, right? So just keep that in mind, that it's okay. A lot of people have moved back because they just can't handle the culture shock. So it is especially important at that point to rent first before committing yourself to buying anything. So those are the couple of like rent versus buying benefits. Now, where do you find rentals? Now, if you are actually thinking about finding something long-term or short-term, where do you go to find these things? For short-term rentals, by the way, short-term, most realtors will consider short-term anything under 6 months. So if you're one of those people that, has a tourist permit, an FMM with 180 days, and you're using it to explore Mexico and just different cities are on your list, awesome, wonderful, right at you. And you should use that time to explore and see where you feel like the city that vibes the most with your energy, right? But where do you go and find these short-term rentals? Number one, we recommend Airbnb. I know that there's like controversy around Airbnb for a lot of local groups because, it has, whether we like it or not, changed the rental market for people, not only in Mexico, all over the world. I mean, if you look up Airbnb news, there's like a ton of controversy anywhere across the world because obviously Airbnb charges a lot of fees, and then the landlords, make less money. So then they charge, higher for their rentals to be able to recoup some of that money and still be a profitable investment, right? So for short-term rentals, I would say Airbnb is by far the best option. For one, most Airbnbs come fully equipped with silverware, linens, towels, unless they say otherwise, but they usually come very equipped with like the essentials that you need to live comfortably. A lot of them have internet, so they come hooked up with utilities. All utilities are usually included unless it states otherwise. Like, for example, if you're renting an Airbnb in Mazatlan, some Airbnb owners, because the electricity is more expensive in the coastal cities of Mexico, some Airbnb owners will put a cap as to how much you can turn on the air conditioner on a regular basis. Or they'll at least like just give you a word of caution, like, hey, when you leave, make sure that you turn on the air conditioner. Just don't leave it running whenever nobody's home, right? But yeah, Airbnb is by far one of the best options because for one, you are able to see pictures, you're able to see reviews. Airbnb has a type of insurance policy that if the listing doesn't match what is being advertised, then Airbnb will try to help you find something that is similar in the same cost or in the same vicinity. Or I've never personally used that insurance policy, but I know it's there, and it is a nice, like, at least it gives you peace of mind that they will try to help you find something similar so that you're not scrounging and trying to find something last minute. So Airbnb for short-term rentals. We also recommend booking.com. There's quite a lot of the same people that post on Airbnb will usually post on other sites like booking.com. Sometimes if you see on the Airbnb, like this is managed by La Isla Rentals or Playa Rentals or whatever, you can go search that broker and see if maybe on their website they have that rental unit available on a short-term basis, right? Like on a week-to-week or month-to-month. And sometimes they have it for a better price directly through them because, again, they don't have to pay those Airbnb costs. So there's ways that you can try to see where you can, save yourself those dollars, those pennies. If you are thinking of finding something long-term, but you're not in Mexico yet, it's not really a good idea to try to rent something before actually arriving. Two reasons. Number one, you should never rent anything before seeing it in person. And yes, there are a couple of like exceptions, but they are far and few in between. There are maybe like a couple of cities across Mexico that get so touristy during the high season, which is right now, until March, which is usually when the snowbirds, right, come to Mexico to escape the winters up north. But, usually, I mean, there are far and few in between. I would say even in the winter months or even in the high season, you're able to find deals. But what happens is in the high season, some landlords will, increase their prices, or maybe there will be less available rentals, short-term rentals, even long-term rentals at the price that maybe you're looking at. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is just, be mindful that there are some areas in Mexico that have high seasons, some have low seasons. Some cities have no impact whatsoever because they don't receive that influx of tourists during, November through January. But yeah, if you're looking for short-term rentals, booking Airbnb.com. Another thing that I want to mention is if you are looking, this is where I was going, if you are looking for a long-term rental and you're not in Mexico yet, we do recommend booking an Airbnb for a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month. It gives you time to be able to scout the area, look at what's available. A lot of rentals in Mexico, long-term rentals in Mexico, are through word of mouth. They are not published anywhere online. The landlords, some of the best ones especially. I mean, yes, there are a ton of rentals that you can find online, long-term rentals online, but I would say the majority of rentals in Mexico, the market still is very much a word of mouth market. So it's really important for you to have boots on the ground to be able to see like what is in the neighborhood that you like. And what you will see most of the time is somebody will put a sign on their window or on their garage or somewhere on the exterior of the building saying that something is for rent available. So if it's an apartment complex or an apartment tower, you will see something like se renta or disponible, and then a phone number, right? And then that just means that they have a space available or something is available for rent, and then the phone number to call for more information. Most of the time, whenever you're not in a touristy area, like if you were, let's say, in Mexico City, if you were in Puebla, if you were in Guadalajara, these are very touristic cities, but with other Mexicans. So it might not be as common for you to just pick up the phone and for somebody to speak English. It might be better for you to do a WhatsApp text message and then use Google Translate to help you translate what you're trying to get or the information that you're trying to get from this person. But a lot of rentals in Mexico are through word of mouth. So I think it's really important to book an Airbnb or booking or hotel for a couple of weeks to a month while you get acquainted with the area. And that gives you time to see like, okay, I like this neighborhood. I like that it has this grocery store nearby. I like that it has a dog park nearby if you have pets. It's walking distance to maybe public transport. Whatever things are important to you. Maybe there's a church nearby that you really want to go to, or maybe, it's close to a cultural center where they have a lot of cultural events, or maybe it's close to all of the above. And just giving yourself that chance to really get acquainted with the area. And then you'll start seeing the signs for, what's available for rent. You can also talk to basically anybody that you meet and tell them that you're renting. You'll be surprised how many people say, oh yeah, I have a cousin who's renting something, or I have an aunt who has a really nice house available for rent, or, I might have something available for rent. So word of mouth is still very, very prevalent in Mexico. And a lot of landlords just don't post a lot of things online because they know they can get these things rented. Rentals in Mexico go fast. So it's also another reason why if you're not in Mexico yet, renting something from afar might not be the best option, because you will find something if you come to town and you just spend a little time looking. I know that for a lot of people that feels uncomfortable, like showing up and not knowing where they're going to live long term, not having something like fully settled. So we do have a lot of realtors in our complete Mexico relocation guide that we recommend that obviously offer rentals, not only sales or not only home purchases. And they can help you, the reason I mentioned like there's a few exceptions why you shouldn't rent before seeing is because There are a couple of realtors that I would say absolutely. If they tell you like, hey, you know what, I really do have 5 other people looking at this property, and maybe it's somewhere like in Ajijic, or maybe it's somewhere in Puerto Vallarta, or Los Cabos or Playa del Carmen, or somewhere where it gets a lot of tourism during the winter months, then I would say, yeah, if it's a really good deal, it's in an area that you really like, maybe it has an ocean view and the price is just unbeatable, something like that, and they can show you at least like pictures or some video to give you an idea of what the state of the place is. And yeah, I would say at that point, if you're working with somebody that's reputable and they have at least an online reputation that you can verify, I would say go ahead. But don't get pressured into giving money or to set a deposit just because it was urgency, right? That somebody else is looking at it and they're going to take it. And so, this like urge to give money to a realtor. There will be other rentals available, but I also don't want to take away from some of the realtors that legitimately sometimes have a very small selection of rentals. It just depends where you're looking. The other thing that I want to mention about Airbnb is a lot of people use Airbnb to find their long-term rental, and they do that by finding a place that they really like. They find good reviews about it, or the pictures are great. They'll go ahead and rent it for a month, and then they will negotiate with the landlord off the platform. Now, that's between you and Airbnb. That is against their terms and conditions, of course. I'm sure the landlord and you are both breaking some contracts there. But a lot of people do that. Like, they will rent it for a month and then they'll directly contact the landlord and say, hey, I would love to rent this for a year. And can you make me a better price, right? The landlord gets the payment directly. Obviously, the one not winning here is Airbnb, but it is a win-win for you and the customer or the landlord. And a lot of people do that. I mean, it's just a reality of things, especially if the Airbnb owner is okay with pets and you have 3 or 4 dogs, or, we have customers who come with 2 cats, 2 dogs, maybe a bunny, they come with like their entire household. And that's okay. Our pets are our family. But sometimes landlords in Mexico might have a problem with a lot of pets and a lot of animals. So if you find a landlord that is open to it and the price is good for you and the location is good for you, you might want to consider maybe making a deal to get something long-term on Airbnb. We also, by the way, we have a ton of excellent realtors that we recommend in our Complete Mexico Relocation Guide. And we don't recommend just anybody. For starters, we don't ask for any commissions. So, I don't have any like vested interest in promoting one versus the other. We're very careful about who we recommend. They don't work with like a minimum budget of like $1,000 or something like that. Because there are a lot of realtors that will only show rentals that are $1,000 or more, or 20,000 pesos or more. So we have realtors that work with all kinds of budgets, but you also have to be realistic in what you can find in your budget. I think a lot of people have this misconception that you can live like a king on pennies in Mexico. Maybe there are a couple of cities where that is true, maybe somewhere, very remote where there are very little people and it's very rural. Maybe there's no services nearby. There's certainly not any medical services. So yeah, that might be the case for somewhere very rural, or maybe in a neighborhood in a city where, it's very, very working class. And I'm not saying that's bad, but it might be shocking to a lot of people to live in a neighborhood like that, especially if you're not used to living in a neighborhood like that. Or it might be a very basic rental. So I will say, just be realistic. I've had people in the past email us and tell us like, hey, my budget is $500. I want to have like a 3-bedroom condo or a 2-bedroom condo facing the ocean, with all utilities included, and maybe be able to have like, a little garden or, and I also want them to be pet friendly. And I mean, that would be like a diamond in the rough. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying it's probably not the norm, especially if you're moving somewhere like Puerto Vallarta or Playa del Carmen or Los Cabos or La Paz or any of the cities that get a lot of tourism because they're beautiful and they're well worth it. But you will find that you can afford that $500 a month condo if you're further from the beach. And I'm not saying you have to be like 30 minutes away from the beach, but maybe you're only 10 minutes away from the beach, or 5 minutes away from the beach. I mean, it really does matter. The proximity to a big landmark does matter, which is another reason why people are now kind of getting away from living in the downtown area of any one city. Like Centro has always been historically an ideal place for people to move to in any city of Mexico, because obviously it's the best connected. Like you have all the amenities, you don't need a car. It usually has really good restaurants, cafes, like a lot of things walking distance to you. But sometimes moving away from the downtown area of a place can be really beneficial for you, to find something that is maybe half the cost. Maybe the contract term is a lot more favorable to you. Like, maybe the person allows you to pay, the exchange rate equivalent to whatever the dollar is, because the dollar fluctuates with the peso. And sometimes when it's not very favorable to your money, then you end up paying more for rent. And so anyway, there's ways that you can negotiate these contract terms, right? But yeah, so I would say that if you're looking for a long-term rental, it's a good idea to find something short-term first, get acquainted with that city. And then if you decide that, yeah, that neighborhood is good for you, you can either use Airbnb to find your long-term rental or to negotiate with that landlord, or it gives you a chance to talk to people, find your long-term rental. Word of mouth, again, don't underestimate it. It's huge. But there are a couple of other ways that you can find long-term rentals, and that includes Facebook Marketplace. It's very, very, very used. You will find that a lot of the listings are going to be in Spanish. You also have to keep in mind how old the listing is, because people are terrible about taking the listings down. And so you might find something that looks great. It's in the city that you want it to be, looks really nice in the pictures, checks off a lot of boxes. But then you contact the owner and they're like, oh yeah, that was like 6 months ago or 3 months ago, and the listing is expired, or, somebody else rented it and they just haven't taken it down. And then some realtors will use Facebook Marketplace as a lead generator. So they might put something out there that is too good to be true, and they get a lot of leads, and then they can try to, sell you or rent you other places that they might be working. But yeah, Facebook Marketplace is a good place for you to find long-term rentals. I will say this though, be cautious. You are dealing with just a random person on the internet if you're going through Facebook Marketplace. So it's very important that if somebody's asking you for a deposit and you have not seen the house, you have not met with this person before, you have no idea who they are, do not send them any money, okay? Only send money to reputable people. If you found them through our online guide, 100% they are vetted by me and they are reputable. But if you did not buy the online guide and you're just dealing with a random person, or maybe you did and you're just looking on Facebook Marketplace on your own, it's still important for you to do your due diligence and not get taken advantage of. Because I see so many people, not only foreigners, I see so many Mexicans post on various groups like, oh, be careful with this person. They told me that if they have this rental, I sent them a deposit. I never heard from them again. So don't send deposits, guys, unless you meet with the person, unless you see the rental, and then, make some verifying questions like, how do they have access to this rental? Who are they in this transaction, right? Are they the owner of the property? And if so, would they mind sharing, like, some things like maybe a utility bill that you can actually use to verify that information? Because it's also not uncommon for people to have access to a property and rent it, and they don't have permission to rent it. It's less common than people asking for money and never actually meeting you, but it has happened before. So just be careful. There are some scammers out there. Just be careful. Do your due diligence for sure. Long-term rentals can also be found on other sites. I mean, for starters, every big rental company in Mexico, like Remax, Better Homes and Gardens, all the big ones, Century 21. There's also like small brokerages that exist throughout the country, will sometimes have rentals, not all the time. Some brokerages will only focus on buying and selling properties or land. But if you find a rental agent that works with a reputable company, then you're probably in good hands. I will still do my due diligence, look them up online, just do a quick search on either Facebook or on Google, and just make sure that there's nothing terrible said about them. Because I have found that too, that we see people post a lot of rentals on various different groups, like rental groups. And they seem to have a lot of rentals available, but then you go and search them, and something that you might not know is that there's a bunch of people calling them a scammer, and that this person took their deposit, never heard from them, and they're just out there getting new leads all the time. So anyway, it pays off to do your due diligence. Facebook Marketplace, the other one is Inmuebles 24, and that's kind of like, I know, a tongue twister for people who don't speak Spanish, but I will put it in the comments. Inmuebles 24 or inmuebles24.com. That one is usually run by, it's not really a lot of individual landlords. Those are usually brokerages that have a variety of rentals available to them. So it's not like you may deal with a landlord every now and then directly, but usually those are also used as lead generators, and they will post sometimes rentals that are still available, but just be cautious that sometimes it is just a lead generation, a lead magnet. And sometimes they'll post a rental that, they really haven't had for months, just to be able to get your information. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying that, it might be like a little bait and switch. So just be careful. The other things that you might come across are common contract terms. So the very first one, deposits are usually 1 month's rent and the month upfront. So you usually pay, if your rental is 20,000 pesos, you will pay 20,000 pesos as the deposit, plus your first month rent, which would be 20,000 pesos. How that gets paid to the landlord is up to the landlord. Many of them take bank transfers. So if you use like something like Wise or Remitly, many of them will be okay with receiving bank transfers. I think it's better. You have at least a paper trail of something that, they received this money and what it was for. If they don't, it's not the end of the world. I don't think it should be a deal breaker for you, but I would say that you should at the very, very least have something in writing, a receipt, something that shows that you have paid a deposit and the first month's rent to this landlord. They should be able to write you a receipt telling you what this was for. And if they can, I would be willing to walk away. Because, I mean, you never know in the long term, in 6 months, if you decide like, hey, this isn't right for me, and you want to be able to, get out of that lease or that contract, and maybe it's just a 6-month contract, and they want to keep your deposit, but you're turning back the house exactly how you found it, and they're saying they didn't receive one. I mean, it might be your word against them. So it's good to have a contract in place. Other things that are very common are, in your contract to look out for are when you're supposed to pay your rent. How is it paid? Is it going to be in cash? Is it going to be through transfers? If your contract is only in Spanish, you reserve the right to have that translated. So, you should know what you're signing. If you don't know anybody in town, I would at the very least run it through Google Translate so you know what the terms are before you sign. But I would say it's a good idea because Google Translate doesn't always get the translation one for one. It's very common because, some words don't mean exactly the same thing in English as they do in Spanish. So it's very important to have somebody advocate for you and just make sure that you know what you're signing. Who's going to take care of repairs? Some landlords say they will only take care of repairs after a certain amount. So, they're not going to be like showing up for every single thing that you ask to be repaired. But yeah, some landlords will say like, only after 900 pesos will I make a repair, or 1,000 pesos, which is $50. Just depends on what is written in the contract. You should also find out in the contract if utilities are included, if your pets are allowed, if there's a pet deposit, how much that is, and then, what are the terms for you to get that pet deposit back, or your deposit too. Some landlords, not everywhere in Mexico, but it's very, very common in cities like Guadalajara, in Mexico City, in Querétaro, in Puebla, in some of the more like traditional Central Highland cities. It's very common for landlords to ask for a póliza de arrendamiento, which is essentially, or even a fianza de arrendamiento, which is essentially an insurance that protects the landlord. And you will need to have like an aval, or somebody like a co-signer essentially, that can vouch for you that if in case you don't pay your rent, then the landlord is protected. Somebody else can vouch for you. Somebody else can basically co-sign for you. If you don't have an aval, sometimes the landlord will allow you to pay a little more on your deposit, just to protect themselves, and because it's the first time they have a relationship with you, so they don't know you, and you're a foreigner. It could be very easy for you to leave the country and stiff them with their rent. So it's just something for them to have in place, that if in case you don't pay your rent, they are protected. But these things do usually need a cosigner, and the cosigner or the aval usually needs to be somebody who is Mexican, who has property in Mexico or assets in Mexico. So somebody that has like some collateral that they would want to pay off this debt before, any of their assets are touched. Sometimes these pólizas de arrendamiento, or like these fianzas de arrendamiento, which are these insurance policies, will have clauses in them that say, you will pay us more, and then that way we can do away with the aval or with the cosigner. So that is a good reason to have a realtor. A realtor knows the ins and outs of these pólizas or these fianzas, or they can do some of the negotiating with the landlord directly for you. So it's a really good idea. In my opinion, it's always a good idea to work with a reputable realtor, even if you're just renting. I think that they know the market really well. They know what areas flood. They know what areas might have problems with water or electricity. They know which ones might have problems with, violence or carjackings or those kinds of things. So I think a realtor, a local realtor in the area, is a really good idea if you've never lived in Mexico. They are usually your advocate and will try to help you to find the place that best suits your lifestyle, your needs. Another thing that you need to look out for on your contract is a lot of rentals, especially in the Central Highlands, will include electricity. Something that a lot of you might not realize is that electricity in Mexico is subsidized a lot. Like a lot of the electricity that is consumed by everyone is subsidized by the government. And so the government has a branch that manages all the electrical grid in Mexico called the CFE, la Comisión Federal de Electricidad. And they subsidize a good chunk of everybody's bill. But part of that subsidy, or part of like the agreement to that subsidy, is that obviously you have to consume a certain amount for that subsidy to still take place. If you consume too much electricity, they will basically kick you out of that subsidy, if you will. It's basically, they will put you in a different bracket, and you will pay more per kilowatt of energy that you consume. So if you were paying, $50 a month and living in Chapala or living in Guadalajara, and then all of a sudden, it got really hot that summer or May, and you bought an air conditioner and you were running a 24/7, and your subsidy might not exist anymore. And then the following year, you might be paying $150 a month for the same amount of electricity usage. So it's really important for you to know these things. Also, coastal towns in Mexico have different price per kilowatt for electricity than Central Highlands do, because it's hotter and people need more things like air conditioning, fans, more electricity in general, coolers, things like that, right, to store food. Whereas like in the Central Highlands, usually people don't have air conditioning, they don't have heating. That is changing more and more based on personal needs. A lot of people feel more comfortable having air conditioning in some of the hotter months like May or June, depends on where you live, but or running fans more often, those kinds of things. But older generations were used to not really having air conditioning. And then of course, it all depends on your budget too. If you can't afford to pay a lot more for electricity, you're probably not going to install an air conditioning unit in your home. But utilities, you have to make sure that you know how much, if utilities are covered in your rental agreement or in your lease, you have to know how much is covered. Is there a cap? If there is no cap, then don't worry. But some landlords will say, yeah, we cover electricity up to a certain amount. So as long as you're under a certain kilowatt usage, the rest you pay. What is included exactly as far as utilities? So is water included? Is propane gas included? How often? Is internet included? If it is included and you work from home and it's really important for you to have a really good high-speed internet, two things. One, have a backup, because it's not uncommon for there to be electrical surges or whatever, and maybe your electricity might go out and therefore one internet might go out, or maybe a tower for one internet provider might go out. So you always have a backup, especially if you work from home. If you are one of these people who is just 100% retired and you're enjoying your life and it doesn't matter if the internet goes out for 1 or 2 hours, then don't worry about it. But a lot of people do have a backup because, we like to stream things. We like to do these kinds of live streams. So, a backup is a good idea. So find out if internet is included. If it is included, what speed is included? So how many megabytes per second are you getting upload, download? I recommend that, a lot of landlords might not know. They might have hired the service years ago and they don't know how much speed there is. So they might just tell you oh, it's really high speed, but they don't really know. So it's a good idea for you to get access to the Wi-Fi and then do a speed test. And, there's a couple different apps that you can do a speed test on. You can go to Google and do speedtest.com, or just Google speed test. And usually one of the first 3 websites that show up, you can just run a speed test. So you can see what the download speed is, what the upload speed is. And if it's good for you, then that's okay. You may be able to, if it's too low of a speed for you, you may be able to negotiate that into your contract that you will continue using whatever service provider they have, but you reserve the right to, contract another company if you need higher speed, or maybe you just pay them additional for them to give you a higher speed, like they call the internet company. There's a lot of landlords, if they own the house and they're renting it out to you, they will not change the utilities in your name. This is something very different than if you're coming from Canada or the United States, because it's not that simple, and 2, they use a lot of the utility receipts and utility activity for their own personal use. So for taxes, for various other things, if they ever want to sell the house in the future, usually those things are also considered as expenses in the home. So it's not common for a landlord, if you're renting for a year or maybe even 6 months, for them to switch all utilities into your name. It's not unusual. It's not completely out of the question, but it's not common. So usually you pay it either included in your rent, or they send you the receipt and then you go and pay it either at an OXXO, or sometimes if you have a Mexican bank account, you can do direct deposit. There's various ways that you can pay those utilities if they're not included. Things to look out for. I mentioned this already, just briefly. Number 1, making sure that you see the property before paying a deposit. It's important to, especially if you're going to be renting for 6 months to a year, look at the property before you actually sign a lease, especially before you give a deposit. Do your due diligence, right, on the person that you are hiring. If you buy the Mexico relocation guide, we have done that due diligence for you, so you know that the people that we recommend in the guide are reputable. But if you still want to research them, by all means, I think it's a good practice to get into to do your due diligence. Other things to look out for: don't assume anything. Make sure that you know what exactly is going to be included in the house when you take possession of it. Just because there's a fridge in the kitchen, don't assume the fridge will stay. Ask questions. It's okay. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I think it's very normal. If you don't know what questions to ask, we do give you a list of questions you should ask before signing a contract for a rental property in Mexico. You can find that on our blog. And if you're interested in signing up for that, let me give you the link to that real quick. I'm going to put it in the comments section. So you'll be signing up. It's called Get Our 6 Tips to Renting in Mexico. And part of what I include is why you should rent a furnished house, things that nobody tells you about finding a realtor, why we recommend working with a good realtor, questions you should ask before renting in Mexico, rental terms that you might hear in Spanish and that you don't know what they are, and Google Translate won't really translate it one for one. So renting in Mexico Spanish cheat sheet, I give you like a list of the most common things that you might see listed on Facebook Marketplace, or maybe on a poster, or somebody might tell you that they need these things and what they mean. When is the best time to rent in Mexico? That's also very important, right? Like high season versus low season, or also whether a place is extremely warm or extremely, wet, or what the extreme temperatures are for that particular area, and maybe when is the best time for you to look into renting long term based on that, so that you're not locked into a place that you absolutely hate if you can't stand the heat, or if you can't stand the humidity, or if you can't stand a big city or the noise, or whatever those things might be. So again, keep yourself flexible. Give yourself that flexibility to scout the area, to explore. Mexico is huge, right? I mean, there are over 200 small cities that you can explore, and they vary from jungles to deserts to beaches to mountains. And there's so much in between. There's obviously some very major cities too, like Monterrey, Guadalajara, Querétaro, Mexico City, of course, Cancun, right, that we've all heard of. So give yourself the opportunity to not rule anything out, and go explore outside of the areas that you already know that you like, just to see that maybe, there might be something else that you like more. All right, I'm going to start taking some questions from the audience here. Hi, Lori. Thank you so much for being here. I've been looking for online apartments in Guadalajara, and some of the prices are extremely expensive. Do you think they would be cheaper if using a realtor in the city? Well, extremely expensive is very subjective, so I don't know what your budget is and where you're looking, particularly online. But I will say that if you have a very specific budget, and I don't know if you know the city very well, like Guadalajara is not only Guadalajara, right? There's also suburbs outside of Guadalajara. They're kind of their own cities, but they make up the greater Guadalajara metro area. So it's just very subjective. Working with a realtor doesn't necessarily mean you'll get a cheaper price. It just means that somebody knows the area really well and can tell you, like, okay, this is your budget, this is what you can afford. Like, this is an area that I think you would be able to afford and that you would enjoy living in. And I know that, it fits your lifestyle, and it's well connected to maybe public transportation, and there's grocery stores nearby, and taxis and Ubers pass by very often. So, or are widely available. So, you wouldn't necessarily need a car if you didn't need to have one. But yeah, without knowing specifically what your budget is and whether, where you're looking online, those kinds of things. I will say, though, that usually finding rentals online, depending on where you're looking, depends completely on where you're looking. If you're looking on websites that are only in English, I will say those are probably going to be the more expensive rentals, right? They're catering to foreigners. They're not catering to the regular working class Mexican. They're catering to foreigners. There's a ton of Facebook groups specifically catered to the working class, right? The regular Mexicanos that earn Mexican pesos are not bringing US dollars or Canadian dollars or euros. And but these are usually all in Spanish. So you would need to have a translator or somebody who's willing to translate things for you, a friend, maybe a private relocation tour guide if you want to look at Guadalajara specifically. But yeah, without knowing specifically your situation, it's hard to tell you. It's very subjective. We do have an excellent recommendation in Guadalajara that has helped dozens of our customers find rentals. She's very good. She works not only in Guadalajara, she also has a team in Puerto Vallarta, Sayulita, Tepic, other parts of Nayarit, and she works with all budgets. But you also have to be realistic in what you're looking for and where specifically you want to live. The scams you need to look out for, the ones I mentioned, do not give somebody money online that you do not know. So if you've never met them before, you have no relationship with them, you're not a customer of the online guide, and you definitely didn't find them in our directory, and they're telling you that they need money now because otherwise they're going to rent that place to somebody else, I would say don't fall for it. Be willing to walk away from that. Specifically if you haven't seen the place. Just because a place looks really nice on pictures or on video, it doesn't mean it's going to be the exact same way when you move in. And believe it or not, we've had people tell us like, oh, I found a really great place on Facebook Marketplace or on Facebook groups, and they sent me pictures, and I went ahead and signed an agreement, sent the money, and then I got there and all the furniture was different. Like it's not uncommon. So yeah, just that would be my very first one. We want to find a rental January through February. Is short term that easy to find? Yeah, Airbnb, Airbnb.com. Go find your rental there. That's really the best option for you. There are other ways to find short-term rentals. There are a lot of property management companies across Mexico that offer short-term rentals. But unless you know about them, you won't really know how to find them, because it's not like there's a marketplace that you can just go find these property management companies. The only way to know really is to rent something short-term. And then once you have boots on the ground, find out what other short-term rentals are available in the area. I will say that for most people, the first 6 months to a year of being in Mexico will probably be your most expensive, because you don't know. You don't know what the typical rental price is. You don't know, you have nothing to compare it to, right? Unless you're from the area and you have family, or maybe if you've taken a private relocation tour with one of our tour guides who can give you some of those insights. But if you know nobody in the area, it will usually be your most expensive time, the first 6 months to a year, because you're just getting acquainted with the area. And there isn't really a control of rents in Mexico. They're trying to do something like that in Mexico City. And maybe if it works out, they'll, across the board, they'll start implementing something like that. But there really isn't a control of rentals. So you can see rentals in all prices. There also isn't an MLS or a central marketplace, right, where everybody can just like upload their rentals. There's things like Facebook Marketplace, but that's not really regulated. Anybody can just go post on there. And again, like I mentioned, some people don't take away their postings. All right, let's see. If I find a rental while scouting a neighborhood, would it be okay to have a realtor call on it, or do the owners not like to get a realtor involved? If the owner doesn't have a realtor that is helping them rent the place, they probably will not want to pay somebody to rent the place out for them, right? Especially if you found it because they posted it somewhere, and they didn't have to pay a realtor to help you find that place. They probably won't want to pay a realtor. Sometimes realtors will act as house hunters, and sometimes they will let you pay them, right? A fee, a commission if you must, something that the landlord wouldn't pay them, for them to help you as the customer, as opposed to getting paid by the landlord. So the realtor might be okay with that. Not every realtor will be okay with that. So just, and in the guide, we do have some house hunters, some people that have access to some rentals and they're not necessarily a realtor themselves. So they get paid by the customer. You pay them 10% of the rental price or whatever their agreement is. And they will give you a list, right? They know which houses are for rent because they have a network of realtors that send them things. And then they'll know what's available in the area and they'll just charge you a percentage of the total monthly fee for access to their network, in other words. And then, they help you do the negotiating and help you set up showings and things like that. So they do a little more than just like, tap into their network. But they are not necessarily realtors. Those are usually like house hunters. Raul, thanks for being here. Here's something I don't hear discussed. Is it a good idea to target towns surrounding major cities like Tequis for Querétaro? Sure, absolutely. If you want to live in Tequisquiapan, why not? There's a lot of people who live outside of the major cities. Like if you're looking at Guadalajara, a lot of people like Tlaquepaque. If you're looking at Puebla, a lot of people like Cholula or Atlisco. For Mexico City, a lot of people like Cuernavaca, Valle de Bravo, Tepoztlan, or other parts, right, outside of Mexico City. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's worth it to look into smaller towns with this in mind. Smaller towns are usually more limited in the amenities that they have. So they're not as well supplied as the major cities that surround them with things like big box grocery stores, transportation. So, like an international airport might be an hour or two away. They might not have the best medical care. So you might have to go an hour into Querétaro to get really good medical care. So yeah, there's a charm to living in some of these smaller towns. There's a really nice appeal to it. There's less hustle and bustle, definitely less pollution, less noise, and they're very charming usually. But just keep that in mind that usually the larger cities have better infrastructure. Not all the time, but usually. I have a question. How do you get your belongings down to Mexico? I don't think it's safe to drive down. What are the options to move your belongings? We'll have another one about driving to Mexico, moving your things and all that. But let's focus on some rentals. Is it common for landlords to hand over their original utility bill for your RFC appointment? Yeah, again, we're going to stick to rentals. No, it's probably not common. Original plan was to retire in 2 years, scope out Guanajuato, 3 weeks next year. Plan changed. Travel in Mexico 1 year, then decide. Question, will it cost me more if I wait to buy? Cost you more what? Like your rental? Not necessarily. It just depends on the market. If in a year that place blows up and there's an influx of people moving to Guanajuato and the rental market is more saturated, then yeah, probably the prices of rentals will go up. Or maybe if just, a lot of landlords decide to post their things on Airbnb because there is a huge influx of foreigners coming to that town with, dollars or Canadian dollars and just more money and are willing to pay more for the same rental that maybe they were renting last year for $400, but now they're renting it for $800. Then yeah, maybe the prices of things will go up. I think it's really important for everyone here. I say this a lot, and I know that, it's hard to put into practice because you don't know what you don't know. But I will say that just because you can afford a rental that seems very moderately priced to you doesn't mean that it's not overpriced. And you will hear this a lot, right? Like people saying that's how cities get gentrified and that's how the cost of living goes up for everybody. I think that is a worldwide phenomenon. It's not unique to Mexico by any means. But I do think it's important. It's a social responsibility to get acquainted with what things cost and know that a typical Mexican household, a couple in Mexico, it's not uncommon for a couple to bring in 20,000 pesos or maybe 15,000 pesos or less. It just depends on that person's like, schooling and where they work and their socioeconomic status and all those things. But it's not uncommon for people to live on less than $1,000 for a family, not just like a single person. So, for you, an $800 rental for a house in somewhere like Guanajuato, for example, might seem like a really good deal, right? Because it's nice and it's like pretty well located and all those things. It's very colonial, very charming. But maybe for the typical Mexican family, that is a lot of money, right? 16,000 pesos would be 90% of what they bring home for that month. So just keep that in mind. Like, be aware of what the typical Mexican makes, and that in proportion to what you're bringing in, it'll be usually a lot less. Not all the time. There's many Mexicans, by the way, that make a lot of money. Mexico is not by all means like all a poor country. There are many wealthy Mexicans. But just be aware that, don't contribute to the accidental high cost of living and what I mean by that is, like, sometimes I see these rentals in Puerto Vallarta going for 60,000 pesos a month, and that's like $3,000, and that's just like outrageous. It's not even like an ocean facing condo. It's just kind of modern, and it's in a nice building, and it has 24/7 security, and it has an indoor pool. And so, like, all those things are appealing, right, to somebody who comes from outside, who's a foreigner, who's never lived in Puerto Vallarta, and they're just like, oh, but I want to be able to have like my privacy, and I want to be able to be in a nice area. But you just have to know that sometimes it's a 60,000 peso rental. Somebody's just price gouging. It's not common. Yeah, your budget is, I think, significant for Guadalajara. We have customers, maybe not customers, but we do have a lot of people that we have. We know a lot of people that we have met, and we've talked to them about their budget. And they've shared with us that, they rent their nice 2-bedroom apartment in a nice neighborhood of Guadalajara for, $650 US. So I think your budget is very good. I just think maybe you're looking in the wrong places. I will say that there are a lot of Facebook groups, like I mentioned, that have a lot of really good rentals, and they are meant for the working class Mexican or the regular Mexican, right? They're not meant for foreigners, because everything is in Espanol. And so how do you find these groups? Well, it's not that easy. First of all, you have to know a little bit of Spanish and know how to do certain search terms. That's why I want you to sign up for the rental tips, because I do give you a lot of these tips on how to find those groups, how to find those search terms, how to know what they mean in Spanish and in English, so that you can look or find rentals like a local would. That's essentially what you want. You want to be able to find the same rentals that a local would and try to get the same prices that a local would. Lori, go ahead and sign in and look under recommended realtors in the guide, in the directory. John, thanks for being here. Are there standard leases that are used, and is it recommended a lawyer review it? There's not really a standard lease that is used all across Mexico. Like, I know that, for example, in the United States, certain states have standard leases, and then some people will just modify them a bit. But there isn't such a thing in Mexico. Now, there can be like a template that you can get from a lawyer if you want to be the one that presents the contract. Or maybe the realtor that is working with you has a standard template that they use, and then they just modify it based on the place that you are renting. But yeah, so no, there's not a standard lease. Is it recommended for a lawyer to review it? Yeah, absolutely. I always think it's recommended for a professional to review a legal binding contract, especially if there's money involved. So I don't think it's a bad idea. I think you are also okay. It doesn't have to be a lawyer. We have plenty of local contacts across Mexico that are not quote unquote lawyers, but they are experts in helping people review contracts and help them see, like, is this in your best interest, not in your best interest? A lot of those are recommended immigration facilitators. The people in the guide that we recommend for our customers to hire to help them with their immigration processes, will very oftentimes also help customers with a variety of other things, like help you review your lease contract, help you review, other contracts that you might be signing, help you get your RFC, help you obtain a driver's license, sometimes help you set up utilities if you're buying a brand new property and utilities are not set up, and a lot of other little things that can be tedious, and especially Mexican bureaucracy where, it can be consistently inconsistent. So just because you see something on a website doesn't mean that that is actually what they practice at that particular office, even if it's a government website. But yeah, I think it's always a good idea to have somebody review it, especially if it's an immigration facilitator that we recommend in the guide and they offer that service. By all means, I think it's a good idea to have them review it because they are a third party and they're not working for that real estate company. So, they have no skin in that game to try to, make it beneficial to the brokerage. Is it legal in Mexico to sublet a rental on Airbnb? I think it depends on the landlord. I don't know if Airbnb has any sort of legal wording on whether you can then, like, you rent it from Airbnb and then you are subletting it to somebody else. I don't know. You'd have to check with Airbnb. That's a great question though, but I'm almost positive it's illegal. All right, so we're here coming up on, we're done on the hour. I thank you all so much for your questions. Do not forget to sign up for this rental tips. And also, I mentioned at the beginning of this live stream that we're doing a giveaway. And so I want to give you the details on that giveaway. If you sign up for our newsletter, and by the way, if you sign up for the rental tips, you're signing up for our newsletter. So if you sign up for our newsletter between now and November, I want to make sure I give you guys the accurate info. Between now and November 20th, you will be entered to win a free Mexico relocation guide. So free access to the complete Mexico relocation guide. And we're going to draw 3 lucky winners on November 26th. So if you're not a customer and you've always wanted access to the complete Mexico relocation guide, but maybe, you couldn't afford it, or you were just kind of on the fence about it, you weren't really sure if it was the right platform for you or the right resource for you, go sign up for our giveaway. We're going to be announcing the winners November 26th. If you do sign up to win this giveaway, please also keep out an eye on your email, because when we announce the winners, we'll do it by email. So if you don't claim your prize, we're going to have to give it to somebody else. So please go ahead and sign up for this giveaway if you're not yet a customer. And again, 3 lucky winners will get full access to our complete Mexico relocation guide without having to purchase it. So again, thank you all so much for being here. Go sign up for the rental tips. It gives you a lot of information that I've covered here, but sometimes it's easier to digest it reading it versus having me, just tell you about it over an hour-long video. And I thank you all for spending your evening with me. We have a video coming soon this weekend. I will share all those details with you in our newsletter and, of course, on our YouTube page and other social media handles. So thank you all. I will see you all soon in our next live stream. Hasta luego.